Okay, heint is doch like bomer. Ja, heint is like bomer. Darf nach Farbrengen wegen like bomer. In Hayem Yem, right? What does it say in Hayem Yem? It says in Hayem Yem. Let's check in Hayem Yem. That like bomer is gewesen mei hayomim hamiyuchadim. Right? I'll read it inside. It says. Eitzel Admor HaEmtzoi by the Mittler Rebbe Hayalag Ba'emen Miyomim Teivim HaMetzion. By the Mittler Rebbe, Lag Ba'emen was one of the special days. Men flecht Arois gehen auf dem Feld, they would go out into the field. Flecht sich nicht waschen, the Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe didn't wash, aber nehmen Maschke. He took Maschke. Was mitzad Habrias hat es nicht getort. Because of his health, he was really not allowed. When a demol gesehen asach meifsim, they saw by the Mittler Rebbe many miracles. Das Reiv meifsim, the majority of miracles is given benegeh kinder. It was regarding children. When a ganz Jahr hat man gewartet for like Beimer. All year long, people waited for like Beimer. You should know that in the Rebbe's Reshimis it's brought that Beklau, the Mittler Rebbe wasn't busy with miracles. When people came to the Mittler Rebbe for Yonim Gashmim, he would send to his brother. The Mittler Rebbe had a younger brother, was a Godel. His name was Reb Chaim Avram. He lived in Lubavitch. And when people came to the Mittler Rebbe with a Yonim Ruchniim, he would take care of it himself. If he came with a Yonim Ruchniim, Avodas Hashem, Torah, he took care himself. If he came from Yonim Gashmiim, he used to send to his brother, the Mittler Rebbe of Reb Chaim Avram. So you would come to Reb Chaim Avram, and you would say to Reb Chaim Avram, I need help with Parnasse, with Kinder, with Gesund. And Reb Chaim Avram would say, standard, why are you coming to me? Das gehen zum Rebbe. You have to go to the Rebbe. So you would answer, the Bruder hat geschickt. In other words, I'm coming to you because your brother sent. So Reb Chaim Avram would say, the Bruder hat geschickt. My brother sent you. Then he would put on a streimel, and he would help you out. Because when the Bruder hat geschickt, it wasn't Reb Chaim Avram that was doing the Indian, it was the Mittler Rebbe. And over there, Reb Chaim Avram was the mouth. Verstehst? That's the word. So here, this is a Chiddush. This Lag Baimer is a Chiddush. That Lag Baimer gewesen Moifsim by the Mittler Rebbe. And the Moifsim is given by Ike Benegeh to Kinder. You know, Rabbi Blau was talking this morning to the Bochrim when I came on about the Rebbe and children. With the Rebbe and children, the Chmamish Apilla Ploim. The Rebbe brought so many thousands of Yiddish Kinder into this world. It's mamish not to be believed how many people have children in the ischus of the Rebbe. And the Rebbe, it was no big deal. It was, it almost was like you didn't even see it happen. And it's a Kinder. There's so many unbelievable stories about the Rebbe and Kinder. I'll tell you a Maaseh from Lashon Hara. You tell a story from Lashon Hara, everyone pays attention. That there was a time that a certain Chassidus, a certain group of Chassidus, who Beklau was very close to Lubavitch, very close to the Rebbe, was angry at the Rebbe. Because whatever it was, they felt like the Rebbe double-crossed them, double-crossed their Rebbe, they were upset. So in a shtibel in Borough Park, where these Chassidim daven, there was a big discussion about the Lubavitcher Rebbe and the fact that he did what they felt was a double-crossed. So they were young guys, and young guys are hot-blooded. So one of the Chaver said, you know what? We'll go online for dollars. This is the truth of dollars. And we'll give him back his dollars. Now, I do not know how to tell you how stupid that would have been. If they had carried out that shtus, I don't have thoughts, let alone words, to bring out how terrible that would have been. It would have been so bad. But they're up in arms, they're hot, young chevre, they're screaming with gains on the Lubavitcher Rebbe, upgeben the dalan. In the shtibel was an old man, an alter chassid. He was also a member of that movement, but his blood had already cooled a little bit, and he had a little bit more seichel. And as they're koching about how they're going to go to Crown Heights and give the Rebbe back his dollars, this old guy finally pops up. And he says, nein. Het nicht gein upgeben the dollar. Het gein upgeben the kinder. He says, don't go give him back his dollar. Go give him back the kids that he gave you. it became very, very, very quiet. Very, very quiet in that shtibel. And as they say, that was the end of the story. It was over. That was it. I mean, they all understood exactly what this person was saying. As to the Tofas against the Lubavitcher Rebbe. With Lubavitcher Rebbe, you don't play, it's fire. Eish Vestach. It's Eish Vestach. Eish Oich Lahu. So by the Rebbe given kinder, given unbelievable. The Moifsim with the children was just mamish amazing. And the stories, some of these stories are pashat, hair-raising stories. I know many people who were married for many years, not one or two, 10, 15 years. And then like Bomer, they got the Yeshua. Like Bomer, year after year, they knew the Rebbe, and like Bomer, they gave him the Yeshua. They went to the Rebbe and they got a Yeshua. Mamish, Maisis Ployim. Unbelievable stories of Gilei Lakus. Just to tell you one Maaseh, which I tell always, I've told the story probably 50 times, is the Maaseh that Rabbi Bucket from Lexington, Massachusetts tells. His first name is Alti Bucket, I think his name is. That he went to the oil once very early. And we're talking now over 20 years ago. Let's say Nun Zayin, Nun Ches, a few years after Gimel Tammuz. He went till very early in the morning, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning. He comes in to the Rebbe, and he sees a Satmer, a Chassidish Yid with pious, and 2 boys, twins. And he brings them into the Tzion, to the Rebbe. And naturally, there's nobody there but the 3 of them. Yeah, but this father and his 2 boys, and Alti Buket, it's the middle of the night, Fatog. He's looking at this guy, he's looking at this Satmer younger man, and he recognizes him. He just looks familiar. He doesn't know how, but he looks up as familiar. This man walks in with his 2 boys, and he says to his 2 boys, Mam, and they're looking at Mame. Say the Mame. So these 2 boys start saying the Mame, the Maimer. The first one says, half a Mame. He said, man, they're still him. It's like as if they're Lubavitcher kids, with Groise Payalach, and Beaver hit. They one said the first half of the Mame, the one said the second half of the Mame, and then they left. When they walked out, so he followed them. And he said to them, how do you come over here? You look a little bit familiar. You're not a stranger to me. So he tells them a Maisa. He was married for many years and he had no children. And he heard you want to get a bracha for kinderlach, but about your Rebbe doesn't come like Bomer. So he came like Bomer. Now, if you could imagine, there were literally hundreds of people who came from all over the world for this day. For this purpose, for kids. And everybody is so tzebrachim. And everybody is so desperate. You want your 5 seconds, your 15 seconds, your 1 minute with the Rebbe. And of course, the people are trying to help the Rebbe get from point A to point B, have to push people back. So it's very sensitive and very nervous, but very, very ernst. Everybody wants to get over to the Rebbe. How many chances do you have? The first chance is when the Rebbe comes from his house. So he goes up the steps, he can stop the Rebbe then, which is around 10 in the morning, let me say. The second chance is when the Rebbe goes from 770 to the mikveh. But this is 2 chances. The first chance is by 770, and the second chance is that you can wait by the mikveh, because the Rebbe has to walk up steps to the mikveh. The third chance is when the Rebbe goes down the steps to the mikveh, and here again there's 2 chances, when he goes down from the mikveh, and then comes back to 770, goes back into his room, right, that people stop the Rebbe. And then the last opportunity is when the Rebbe actually went to the oil. Anyway, this Satmar younger man comes to 770. He sees what's going on. And there's a Vada Masad, there's a whole bunch of people whose job it is to hold the crowd back so the Rebbe could push it, get from his room to the car, and from his car to his room. He fights his way through the Vada Masad, and the Bochum are trying to hold him back. But first of all, he's stronger than them, and the Ikid is his inyan is negad mitzeh Rachmana litzlan. You know, Rachel Imeinu says, Im ayin meisa anoichi. Unkinded is min ames. It's such a desperate thing. You know, people get married, they have children, they don't think twice about it. And it's a nes golim min hashamayim. V'haraya, like it says in Chassidus, it doesn't always work out so simple. So he fights his way through this Vada Mesader, and he runs over to the Rebbe. By the time he gets over to the Rebbe's already sitting in the car. The Rebbe's already sitting in the car. And he pokes his face into the car, through the door, and he says, Rebbe ben Zacher. Rebbe, what a bracha for ben Zacher. And the Rebbe looks up at him and says to him, Mit wem wird spielen? Who's he going to play with? Mit wem wird spielen? That's a funny question. You come to the Rebbe, ask the Ben Zocher, and the answer is, who's he going to play with? So he doesn't know what to do. So the Rebbe says to him, Zog Amen. Say Amen. So he says Amen. And he had twins. So they have wem wird spielen? The first one is spielen mit dem zweiten, the zweite gespielt, and this is these twins. So for the Bar Mitzvah, he brought them to the Rebbe. He told them the emes that were born from a bracha from the Rebbe, and he brought them to the Rebbe. There's a story that went around a couple of years ago. It's a true story, and it's be'emes a maise pileploim. It's mamish a moiden dika maise. It's a moiden dika maise. It's a moiden dika maise. It's a maise about children. A younger man is sitting on an airplane. And one of the people who tells the story heard this directly from this younger man. And across the aisle from him is sitting a Yid, an Elach Yid, with two sons, I think, two children. And they're traveling from California to America, or back. So he turns to his neighbors, Elach Yidin, Frume Yidin, Shalom Aleichem, was macht ihr, wann kommt ihr? Where do you live? He lives in Kiryat Sefer. I've never been to Kiryat Sefer, but the way I heard the story, Kiryat Sefer is this Bal Yerah, the Baal Shem Tov's name is Leisham Al Pichetz, like a big Aveda. It's a very misnagdisha place, Litvisha place, Oilamisha place. He says, why are you coming to America? He says, I came to the Tzion of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Tzion of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, wie kommt a Yid von Kiryat Sefer to the Tzion of the Lubavitcher Rebbe? So he tells a Maise Pele, Mamish. He got married. He was married for a few years. He didn't have any children. I don't know how many years, maybe 10 years. And him and his wife didn't even have the best shalom bayis. You know, other people had better shalom bayis. So at one point, they started to contemplate divorce. They don't have children. Al pi halacha, after 10 years, it's supposed to be get you. With Paltiel, the shalom bayis was not so mamish gvaldik. So he went over to the Rosh HaKollel. He was a Yid sitting and learning, Kol Yimei Chayav. And he said to the Rosh HaKollel, what should I do? I don't have any children. And it's not like my wife and I have the world's biggest shalom bayis. So how should I proceed? So the Rosh HaKollel says to him, you know, I think under these conditions, you should consider, Rachmana litzlan, as the expression is, to break Shem Havaya, to take the Yud of Ish and the K of Isha and tear it in half, like we learn between Pesach and Shavuos. Mesechta Soita, so you hear over and over again, Yimocha Shmi Alamayim. Last is Shalom Benish Lishta. The Abish's name should be erased to make Shalom. And here, you're going to break it yourself. So he says to his Rosh Yeshiva, he says to his Rosh HaKollel, who's going to discuss it with my wife? He says, my Rebbitzin. The Rosh HaKollel says, my wife will talk to your wife that since you have no children and the Shalom Bayis is not the best, maybe you should separate and look for other people. Anyway, that night, him and his wife are talking about their predicament, about their situation. I do not know whether he brought up divorce or didn't bring up divorce, but he certainly discussed the fact that they don't have any children and they also don't have such shalom bayis and how they should proceed. And they talked for a long time, and as they're talking, she falls asleep. She wakes up, and she wakes him up. And she says, I had a dream. In my dream, I saw the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The story happened in the last 5-6 years. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe said to me that some 30 years before, almost 30 years before, in the yeshiva in Panovich, there was a big sharuria, a big tumult against me and my Talmidim, my Chassidim. And some very, very unpleasant things, very not nice things were said about us. And one of the leading critics, the leading tumblers, at that time was your husband. Maybe the reason you don't have children is because your husband spoke out against me and my people without even knowing who we are. So I'm thinking maybe if you could fix this, maybe you'll be able to have children. She wakes him up. And she tells him that she had a dream. So he gets really upset at her. Why? How did you dream the Lubavitcher Rebbe? You know, the Altavot, Pillar the Kupa de Machta. You can't dream an elephant growing through an eye of a needle unless you thought about it during the day. They didn't think about that Rebbe for years. How did she get the dream? And he tells her that she's out of her mind, and and they go back to sleep, and he has the same dream. The Rebbe comes to him. And he says to him, I was by your wife. Maybe this prat isn't true, but he says to him, so many years ago, in Tafshin Memtes, in the Paravich Yeshiva, they spoke out terribly against the Rebbe and the Rebbe's people. And you were from the Rosh HaMedabrin. This guy was very talented. He was a great speaker. And maybe that's why you have no children. And maybe if you'll be mitak in this Indian, you'll have children. Anyway, now she had it and he had it, so he's already not so freaked out by this. He comes the next day to Koil, and he goes over to Zreish HaKoil, and he says to Zreish HaKoil, the Maisa. I said, what do I do? What do I do? My wife had this dream, I had this dream, what do I do? Zreish HaKoil was obviously taken aback. This is a Maisa. He says, like, you don't have to believe it, but you have to be chayshish. Take your wife, go to New York, go to the Tzien of the Lubavitcher Rebbe and Bet Mechila. But Api Allah, you have to have a minyan. He says, if you'll take a Lubavitcher minyan and explain to them why you're there, they'll lynch you. They'll chop off your head. So you have to take a Mesnagdish minyan. Where are you going to get a Mesnagdish minyan? He says, I have a shvager who has a koilel in Borough Park, a litvish oilemish koilel. You'll take chevra from that koilel. You go in the middle of the night when nobody is there, and you'll ask Mechila. So that's what he did. He flew with his Ebbets into New York, and they got together a whole bunch of chevra from this koilel. They went in the middle of the night to ask Mechila from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the guy has kids. The guy has kids, but mamish. Every year, he takes his kids to New York, to the Rebbe, to say thank you. That sensitivity, a Lubavitcher doesn't have such a sensitivity. Every year he flies, he's not a rich man, he's a koilel person. He takes his children with him, they fly to New York, they go to the oil, Zagnadank, and then they go home. It's an unbelievable story. But it's one of thousands of stories, thousands and thousands of stories of the Rebbe mit Kinderlach. It sounds like noch a Meise. I didn't mean, by the way, to Farbrengen about stories. I wanted to Farbrengen about the Hayem Yeh, but the Revaile, I'm on a roll, as they say. I'll tell you stories. This is a Moedendika Meise. I saw it many years ago. I don't remember where. Probably in Kvachabad magazine. But I believe it's a true story. Was is the Meise? The Meise geht azoi. That there was a Yid who lived in Bnei Brak amongst very, very big misnagdim, who literally, the Lashon of the Friedrich Rebbe, Achenu Sainenu, they haben uns feind. They hate us. They hate me, Mele, they hate the Rebbe. His father always said to him, his father used to tell him, that if people ever speak against the Lubavitcher Rebbe, you're not allowed to be mishtatev, because you were born with a bracha from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. You were born with a bracha from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. That's what he tells him. And he tells him the Maisa, that it was after the war, after the Holocaust. He was in Paris, and he'd been married for many years. Him and his wife, I don't know how they survived the war, but they were in Paris. They'd been married for many years, and they did not have any children. When the Rebbe came, they told him this is the Eidim of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, this is the son of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So he can't learn. He was a Benteda, Barurian, a Talmud Chochem. So he started to talk to the Rebbe and learning, and the Rebbe Pashat enjoyed talking to him. And occasionally, a few times, him and the Rebbe schmoozed for a Meshach Zman in Limud. He, of course, loved it, and the Rebbe had a little nachas ruach. Anyway, someone says to him, I see that the Lubavitcher Rebbe's son-in-law and you are mishtashea b'divrei Torah. You're enjoying each other's company with divrei Torah. He's the son of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Mit beide head. Good yomtiv. The son of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, go ask him for a bracha for children. So he says, it's not my style. Ich come from Litvische. Litvische bet nicht brachas. We don't believe in Rebbes. We believe only in Torah. He says, listen, what do you got to lose? Ich meine, hast du Kinder? It's mamish the worst thing in the world. So he tells the Rebbe this. It was right before Pesach, and him and the Rebbe were having a conversation. The teuchen of the conversation was about the mitzvah of Sipu Yetzias Mitzrayim, right? It's a mitzvah, say Deiraisa, that you're supposed to tell a story of Sipu Yetzias Mitzrayim. And of course, one of the details of Sipu Yetzias Mitzrayim is that V'yigada to Levincha, right? The Torah says Sipu Yetzias Mitzrayim is to the children. So at the end of the conversation, he tells the Rebbe that he never had children. And the Rebbe took his hand, very warmly, he shook his hand, and with a big smile, the Rebbe said to him, Das ist far v'higada to Levincha. He moved to Yisrael, and within a year he had a ben Zach, he had one son. Mamash, a clear bracha from the Rebbe. This boy grew up, he went to the best yeshivas, and in some of his yeshivas, or in a lot of his yeshivas, and all of his yeshivas, they spoke against the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And his father always said, you were born from a bracha from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. You're not allowed to participate in these conversations. 4 decades passed, 40 years passed. He came to America for a wedding. He'd never been out of Eretz Yisrael. He came to America for a wedding, which took place in Lakewood. So while he was in Lakewood, he told people he wants to visit New York. So they asked him, why does he want to visit New York? He says he wants to go see the Lubavitcher Rebbe. They were shocked. A Misnagda Sharid, a Litva Sharid, who spent his whole life in Bnei Brak. He didn't explain, he just says he wants to go see the Rebbe. Anyway, he had a hard time getting directions, he got to Brooklyn. He had with him a bocher, his own son, who was a teenager, and they got online for dollars. He had no intentions of saying anything to the Rebbe, just wanted to go by, and the Rebbe should see him, he should see the Rebbe, and the Rebbe's going to give him a dollar. Bracha v'atzlocha. He comes over to the Rebbe with his son. The Rebbe gives him a dollar, bracha v'atzlocha. The Rebbe gives his son a dollar, bracha v'atzlocha, and then the Rebbe calls him back. And he gives him a second dollar. And he says to him, Das is far v'yigada to Levincha. This is, for in other words, the same lashon that the Rebbe had used 40 years before when he gave his father a bracha. So he told him, Das is far v'yigada to Levincha. So he knew that not only did the Rebbe give him a bracha that he should be born, but the Rebbe remembered him. The Rebbe recognized him. The Rebbe knew who he was. The Rebbe knew which child. Das ist ein Kind. Das ist ein Kind. Like I said, there's so many stories. There's Onashir Maises. With the Rebbe and Kinder, there's stories ad blidai. There's mamish Maises Onashir Nanabrek. Anyway, getting back to the Mittler Rebbe, getting back to the Hayoim Yoim, which how this conversation started. The Mittler Rebbe allein hat nicht getan kein Moifsen. We needed a Moifes for Dvarim Gashim from the Mittler Rebbe. He was sent it to his son, his brother, Reb Chaim Avram. The Mittler Rebbe was Isaac in just Chassidus, Avoida. But like bomer upon him was the Yitzam and Akalas, which says here, Eitzat Moram Tzoi, Hoya like Be'emem, Yomim Tevim, Hamutzayonim. In fact, Aroiz gained off a feld, like bomer was very special. They got into the field. Flecked sich nicht waschen. The Mittler Rebbe didn't wash. Aber nehmen Maschke. The Mittler Rebbe took Maschke. Was mit der Bries hat es nicht getart. His health did not allow him to say L'chaim. Men ademel gesehen asach moifsim. Unlike bomer, there's so many miracles. Das Roiv moifsim is given benegei kinder. Most of the miracles was for children. When a ganz yard think about the flag bomer, all years flag bomer. So I want to talk about this business. I just want to describe to you what the Friedrich Rebbe writes in the Siches, how the Seder was in Lubavitch. If you remember, Lubavitch, like it says in the Likutei Deburim in the Sefer Siches, Lubavitch was the Ir Habir of Chassidus for 102 years, 101 years, 103 years. There's different girsas. Lubavitch was the capital of Chassidus Chabad for the 4 generations: the Mittler Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Marash, and the Rebbe Rashab. Now, I don't know if this is true for the entire 100 years, but it's certainly true for the first 50 or 60 years. 50 years, 55 years. That there was a whole Seder, Hai Menachem Mendel, Menachem Mendel Ezer, Shalom Aleichem. There was a Shalom Ber H, Shalom Aleichem. There was a whole Seder, how things used to happen. B'chlal, every Yom Tov had its own minhagim, everything was the Seder Mesuder. The Friedrich Rebbe describes how there were certain Chassidim that had the schus that they would take from their rivers Maim Shalonu. And every year there's a whole competition from which field they would take waters for the matzahs of Shmura. There was another group of Chassidim, each one had a schus from which one they took wheats for Shmura. And there were several Chassidim who had this schus, and they would rotate and they would compete. Weißt du, who would be Zoiche that the Rebbe would take matzah Shmura, the wheat for Shmura from their fields. And one of the competitions in Lubavitch was who would be Zoiche to host the Farbrengen of Lag Bomer. There were several, it says in the names for 2 or 3 Chassidim who lived not far from Lubavitch. But Ken Main in Lubavitch is a big city. Lubavitch is a loch, Lubavitch is a hole in the wall. But the case Nashtot, people used to live in more remote places, even more rural places than Lubavitch. And Lag Bomer from Genafenfeld. Unless there were 2 or 3 Chassidim whose names I don't remember, and they would alternate. For reasons that I don't understand, the Farbrengen of Lag Bomer was milchik. The Farbrengen of Lag Bomer was milchik. And the Farbrengen of Lag Bomer lasted about 30 hours or 36 hours. And it never stopped. From the time they arrived till the time they left, there were people sitting in Farbrengen. Nobody could sit straight 36 hours because people had to daven, people had to learn, people had to rest. But the Farbrengen, there was always people sitting by the tish, sometimes more, sometimes less, sometimes this one, as they write. But Farbrengen was non-stop, 36 hours in Verbracht. And all the Chassidim who came to Lubavitch, all the Chassidim were in Lubavitch at that particular time. The Chassidim used to come to Lubavitch, they didn't come for a day, like now, They came for a couple of weeks. So if you were in Lubavitch, Lag Bomer, so it was Genafenfeld. And the Seder was like this, excuse me. They would announce which Chassid was Zoiche, that year the Farbrengen would be by him. And Erev Lag Bomer, Lamed Beis Bomer, after Mincha in the afternoon, they would walk to that estate, to that village, or take a wagon. And they would wash, and they would sit in Farbrengen through that night, into the next day, late into the night, Matzah Lag Bomer, and then they would go back to Lubavitch. Sometime during the day, sometime during the Mislas, the Rebbe would come with his wagon to this estate where the Chassidim were, and he would sit for a while. He would say Chassidus, he would Farbrengen, he would tell stories, and here you see that there was also a name for Moifsim, Grace of Moifsim. And this was the Seder Lag Bomer for many, many years. So there's a story which the Rebbe said overcome upon me. The Rebbe didn't tell the whole Arichas HaSipur, but the Nekudas HaSipur the Rebbe told. And it's a good story to tell. It's a very, very important Chassidish Maaseh. The story is that one year it happened, like this year, that Lag Bomer was on a Tuesday. When Lag Bomer is on a Tuesday, so the Monday, Erev Lag Bomer, Yud Zayin Ba'omer, is the second Monday of Bahab. Right? You know that there are Yidden who fast after Sukkot and after Pesach. In case there was Kalas Reish. And who fasts? The people who are the most Erlich, the people who are least likely to have a Shaykhas to Kalas Reish, are the only ones who fast. But you can't fast in Nisan. And Mepnei Siba, they didn't fast the first Monday if Rosh Chodesh was Sunday. So they delayed it by a week. So then it would work out that the first fast was Yud, the second fast was Chesvas Yud Daled, and the third fast was Yud Zayin. That's how, and this is how it would be even now. If people fast Bahab in this year in Tavshin Pei, so they would have fasted yesterday and the Thursday before and the Monday before, even though the Beis Nisan, Beis Iyar was on a Monday or a Sunday, I forget. Our kid said they came from Feld. And there were a lot of Chassidim who were fasting. They were Yidei Shamayim, they were Erlich Yidden, they were also Bali Madrege, and they were also Greis Alamdim, they were big people. And a lot of them were fasting. So they got a Bezdin together, there was no shortage of Rabbonim. And the Rabbonim were Mater Neder, and that everybody who was there should be Mater Neder, and they should sit down in Lekavod Rashbi, they should wash, and sit down to the Farbrengen even though there was a fast. And everybody did. All the Rabbanim paskin, and all the Rabbanim were mataneder, and all the Rabbanim washed, except for one. Rabbi Hillel Parasher refused. Rabbi Hillel Parasher was so frum. Rabbi Hillel Parasher's frumkeit was not from this world. The Frierdiker Rebbe says about Rabbi Hillel Parasher that a tzaddik b'maisa azevi Rabbi Hillel is not given 300 years. A tzaddik in the area of frumkeit like Rabbi Hillel Parasher had been for hundreds of years. And Rabbi Hillel Parasher wouldn't wash. Rabbi Hillel Parasher waited for the sun to set. He davened ma'ariv, and then he washed. He finished the fast. Anyway, he sat down to the Farbrengen. I have to understand. A lot of the people, this Farbrengen, were Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe. And some of them were much older than Rabbi Hillel Parasher. And some of them were also bigger Talmidei Chachamim. Rabbi Hillel Parasher was a Goan Olam. But Tzedom Madreges and Goan Olam Eichet. And Rabbi Hillel was a young man. Right? Rabbi Hillel, by the Mittler Rebbe, was a young man. When the Mittler Rebbe became Rebbe, Rabbi Hillel Parasher was, I don't know, 60, 70 years old. He was a young man. He was like a chassid from the Mittler Rebbe, and he was a Gevaldik Bal Madrege. He was an Ovid, and he was a Tzaddik, and he was a Yerei Shamayim Erabim, but he was young. And some of the Chassidim, who were much older than Rabbi Hillel, felt that this was misplaced frumkeit. That's a frumkeit sheleibim kemi. So one of the greatest Chassidim there was Rabbi Isaac Homler. Rabbi Isaac Homler could have been Rabbi Hillel's father for sure, maybe even Rabbi Hillel's grandfather. Rabbi Isaac Homler was from the G'dei Chassid Admor HaZaken. He was much older than Rabbi Hillel. And he was also an incredible, the Frierdiker Rebbe calls him Harav HaGoan HaAmiti, Isha HaShkoiles, Rabbi Isaac. And Rabbi Isaac couldn't take this frumkeit. So by the Farbrengen, in a way which is by Chassidim Gevez Namo, hat gesagt. Rabbi Isaac said to Rabbi Hillel, with all due respect, this is a mishagas, you know. There's frum and then there's mishuga. And when all the Chassidim are sitting together in Hilul Rashbi, and the Mesamech b'Simchasi, and the Rabbonim Paskim soll mataneder sein, bis du Punkt der Frumer, was willst du mit dein Tonnes? And Rabbi Isaac told him, this is not Chassidus. This is mishagas. Because Chassidus, everything has a balance, and there's a time and a place for everything. And under these conditions, Rabbi Hillel should have done what everybody else did. He should have also been mataned, and he should have also washed. When Rabbi Isaac told us to Rabbi Hillel, the thing that's most important to understand is that there's no question about it that Rabbi Isaac hat das gemeint l'shem shamayim. It wasn't that he was pushing him down on the floor so he could step on him, you know. Why do people mavatal one another by Farbrengen? They mavatal you that I can stand on your back and I become a chassid because you're not a chassid. That kind of attitude was not shaykhs by the Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, by the Chassidim of the Mittler Rebbe, and certainly not by Rabbi Isaac Homler. And it is gemeint mit hanemes. He really felt that this was a frumkeit that was that even for the madreg of Rabbi Hillel Parasher, it was shaleibim kemi. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says Rabbi Hillel got very emotional. So Rabbi Isaac hat ihm reingesagt. That's what happened. Rabbi Isaac hat ihm reingesagt. He told him off. Good evening, Meir Zev. I want to thank you for showing me your face because most people think it's Purim today. They have Lag Baimer and Purim confused, and they're all wearing masks. The problem is there's no diversity. All the masks look exactly the same. It's a gray, very dark gray, almost black rectangle with some words. So I appreciate the fact that I can see your face. I appreciate it. Noch a paar Brochen haben wir wissen sehr Pennemen, including Menachem Mendel. I think, Gansberg, can you move or you're also a picture? You're a picture. What's us the matter, boss? You can see me, I should be able to see you. Anyway, Rabbi Hillel got upset in response. And he started to cry. Oh, Menachem Mendel, Hatzadik. He started to cry. And he said to Rabbi Isaac Homler his story. His story. How he came to Lubavitch. And the Maise, it's a famous Maise. The Kitzer Maise is, but Kitzer Nimritz, the Maise is that his father was a big tzaddik. Rabbi Hillel's father was a Meir HaLevi, and he was a Talmud of Reb Nachum Chernobyl, who was yet by the Baal Shem Tov and by the Mezritcher Magid. Reb Nachum Chernobyl, Alter Rebbe's oldest friend. And Reb Nachum Chernobyl came to the city where Reb Hillel lived. Reb Hillel was 2 years old. Hillel was 2. Reb Nachum was very old. Reb Nachum passed away Tov Kuf Nun Chas. Reb Hillel was born Tov Kuf Nun Hey. So Reb Hillel, who was 3 years old when Reb Nachum passed away, maybe even less than 3. Because I think Reb Nachum Chernobyl's yard site is in Tishrei. So Reb Nachum came, and there was a lot of Chassidim. So Reb Meir HaLevi, Reb Hillel Parach's father, carried him to the Beis Medrash. They should see the tzaddik, the Rebbe, Reb Nachum. And there was a lot of pushing. So he wanted him to be safe until they would get a chance to go over and give him shalom. So they put him up on a window. They had a ledge, a window, and they put up. The little boy is 2 years old. He should be able to see Reb Nachum, and no one should push him. When you put the little boy up on the ledge, Reb Hillel was 2.5. Reb Hillel starts to scream in the language, the dialect that they spoke. It's a Russian or Ukrainian language. Fire. Reb Hillel Patch was 2 years old. He saw Reb Nachum Chernobyl at the Gezen fire. He started screaming fire. Reb Hillel was such a sensitive neshama. There was a Chassidus from the Rebbe, Pesach Malstovka, used to say, Rabbi Hillel is Kodesh Merechem U'Meleida. Rabbi Hillel's Kedusha is from infancy and from birth. And he brought this as a raya. That when he was 2 years old and he saw Reb Nachum Chernobyl, he screamed fire. So Rabbi Hillel was a Talmud, and Reb Nachum Chernobyl passed away. So Rabbi Hillel went to his son, Reb Mordechai, Reb Motla Chernobyl, who was a very, very famous Rebbe, was a big Rebbe, was a big tzaddik. He was a Tzama Tzaddik Gomer, and a Goan, and a Kodesh, and Ish Elokim. And he served his Rebbe, right? He went in the derech of his Rebbe. And coincidentally, he Bashkocha Pratas came across the Sefer Tanya Kadisha. He lived in the Ukraine. He lived where the Polish Chassidim lived, and he came across the Tanya. And he started to learn the Tanya. And the Tanya Tam Genumen. The Tanya he found emes. Rabbi Hillel Parach was the one who said that until I learned the Tanya, I used to think I'm a tzaddik. And once I learned the Tanya, I used to say, Halavai Beinani. The Rebbe once repeated this by Farbrengen, by Yosef. And the Rebbe said, how could a person say Halavai Beinani? If you say Halavai Beinani, then you're saying that you're a Rasha. A Yid is not allowed to say about himself he's a Rasha. The Rebbe had a kasha. How could you say Halavai Beinani? Chotcha feel the emes is that in Tanya Perikov Zayin, the Rebbe himself feels the Lashon Halavai Beinani. But anyway, he learned the Tanya, and he felt that the Tanya was emes. He felt that the Tanya was emes. So he decided he has to go see the Alter Rebbe. Und der Ashgoch is gewesen, if I understand the story correctly, that the Alter Rebbe was Yemelt in Ukraine. The Alter Rebbe was near where he lived. Because of the famous story, the Alter Rebbe came to make Pesach for the B'disha V'Rav Zalmon and Shidin Amaisis. Anyway, he went to the city the Alter Rebbe was. He comes to town, and he says, where is the Alter Rebbe? And tell him he just left. Where did he go? They tell him which town he went to. So he went to that town, he comes to the town. Where's the Alter Rebbe? He just left. Where is he going? They told him which town, so he went to that town, he comes to the town, there's where's the Alter Rebbe? The Alter Rebbe just left. Hat verstanden, he realized that Min HaShamayim, there's a psalmaisa that they're not meeting. It's not by mistake. So at Poshtates, he didn't go to the next town, he went to 2 towns. He asked where the Alter Rebbe is going next, and where he's going to go after that, and he went ahead of the Alter Rebbe. And he came to the town where the Alter Rebbe was going to come next. And he figured out the Rebbe will come to town. He's there ahead of him. For the Rebbe came to Marangen, who gave him a zettel, and as they say in the Polish Welt, Makabel Morazain, the Rebbe should be his Rebbe. Now I have to give you a little bit of an Iberais. I have to tell you how the Alter Rebbe operated. And the Mittler Rebbe had a different seder. The Alter Rebbe's Chassidim were Pnimiyim and they were Oivdim, Be'emes. Sai Pnimiyim and Sai Yoivdim. They were real Jews, serious, hard-working Jews. But the Alter Rebbe, the Chassidus, at least for the Bali Madrege, the Alter Rebbe had Poshat Yid, the Alter Rebbe had Bali Tshuva, also Kiyadu before him. But the Bali Madrege used to wait for a few years, and they would do a lot of Avodah before they even think of going with Alter Rebbe to Yechidus. Then, when they were ready, they would get a note from the Mashpia, whoever it was. They would come to Lozhne or later to Liadi, and they would have an opportunity to go into Alter Rebbe to Yechidus. When they came to the Alter Rebbe to Yechidus, a lot of these people, before they came to the Alter Rebbe, were already big Talmidei Chachamim. Greis Alomdim. Some of them were Goinim. They did not come to the Alter Rebbe for Lomdes. They came to the Alter Rebbe for a connection to Hashem, for a derech and avodas Hashem, for a connection to Atzmas Ein Sof. They came to the Alter Rebbe, they were Mesa Nefesh, they were risking their lives and their parnasa and their families and their safety, because they wanted a connection to Atzmas Ein Sof. That's what the Alter Rebbe gave, a connection to Atzmas Ein Sof, to the Meibishter. And they would finally come to Lozhne, or to the Adi, they would go into the Alter Rebbe, and they would put on a zettel, or give him a zettel. And the minig HaKavua was that the Alter Rebbe used to say, "Vos is dir schwer," which means, what questions do you have in Nigla de Teira? Vos is dir schwer. So you would tell the Alter Rebbe your questions, he would give you answers, and that was the first Yechidus. After all the preparation, the whole first Yechidus was Lamdus. And then you made a second appointment. And when you went in the second time, now the Alter Rebbe addressed your questions in Nani Avoida. In Hayom Yom it's brought that the first Yechidus, which by the Alter Rebbe was really the second Yechidus, was Lefi Sheidish HaNeshama. Every person that had Yechidus based on the Sheidish of his Neshama. All the Yechidus after the first were a support of the initial Yechidus. But before the first Yechidus was a Yechidus before that, what the Alter Rebbe would say to the Chassid, Vosed Dishver, what questions do you have in Nigla? And the Chassid had to tell him the questions, and the Alter Rebbe would give them answers. And there's a famous story with a famous Chassid, whose name was Baruch Mordechai Babroisker. He had 3 kashas in Nigla that he asked all the Goynei Vilna, including the Vilna Gaon himself, the Gra. And the Vilna Gaon answered the 3 terutzim, 3 kashas, and the Vilna Gaon told him that he himself admits the terutzim that he's giving him are deichik. The terutzim are bedeichik. And all of Vilna knew about the Baruch Mordechai's 3 kashas. What they didn't know was that secretly the Baruch Mordechai became a chassid. Anyway, he came to the Alter Rebbe in his first Yechidus. He had spent a lot of time, maybe 2 years, with the kibbutz, with the secret society of Chassidei Chabad in Vilna, which was a place of great danger. I don't know if you know that Baruch Mordechai Breisk was a Yosef. His father died when he was a little boy. And he went off to learn in the different yeshivas. And one day he found out, he hears a rumor that the Av Bezin of Vilna, Harav Shmuel, who was an alman, lost his wife, is marrying an almona from this in the city, I think it was Shvinzian, whose name is Kach V'Kach. He hadn't seen his mother in many, many years. But the name of the almona that's marrying the Av Bezin of Vilna is the same as his mother's. Is the Yekum in Leifen, and he finds out that his mother moved to Vilna, his mother. And she married the Av Bezin of Vilna, Harav Shmuel, who was a very famous misnagid, Bezivik Sheni. So the Baruch Mordechai was geknippt and gebunden with Spitz Vilna. He was mamish, one of the greatest Talmidim of the Vilna Gaon. He was the nephew, he was the B'nai Chigad, he was the stepson of the Av Bezin of Vilna, and so on. And he became a chassid. It was like really bad. It was a sakona. And he came to Alter Rebbe in his first Yechidus after working very hard to be allowed into the Chavraya. It took a long time just to get in. He comes to Alter Rebbe's first Yechidus with his zettel, and in his zettel he wrote in Yoni Avoida, Pnimius. He was a person of Emes, a person of Mesiras Nefesh. He wanted a derech and Avodas Hashem. So he came to the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe says to him, Vos is dir schwer? What questions do you have in Nigla de Teira? So he told the Alter Rebbe, Ich bin nicht gekommen da of them. I didn't come here for Nigla. I had plenty of Nigla in Vilna. I had plenty of Nigla in Shinsian and in Minsk and in Pinsk and in Shklov. I came here for the Meibishter, for Derech and Avodah. So the Alter Rebbe said to him, this is the Seder, that the first Yechidus is Nigla. So he told the Alter Rebbe this famous 3 kashas that he had asked all the Goynei Vilna and all the Goynei Shklov. And the Alter Rebbe answered. But the answers that the Alter Rebbe gave were so glatt, they were so moinedik, that he was mamish mispal. When he came back to Vilna, he went into the Gra, to the Vilna Gaon, and he told the Vilna Gaon these 3 answers. And the Vilna Gaon said, these answers can only come from Gan Eden. You tell me where these answers came from. The lashon in the Chavral is, Mu Vilna Mona Basrei Lebe Masusa. I'll schlep his vesh, his underwear, to the mikveh. You tell me who said that. Abakamis Misharis. And the Baruch Mordechai was afraid to tell the Gra. Years later, there was a public burning of the Tanya in the streets of Vilna. The Vilna Gaon had, of course, had signed on the Chedim against Chassidim. And when they burned the Tanya B'chutz Vilna, the Vilna Gaon stood there as they were burning the Sefer Tanya Kadisha. By this point, the Baruch Mordechai was already known as a chassid. It wasn't a secret anymore. So he went over to the Vilna Gaon and he said to him, the mechaber of this sefer is the mocker of the three terutzim to the three kashas that I asked. So the Vilna Gaon said, now you're in a ger b'dover, you're apostle Eidus. Now that everybody knew he's a chassid, halachically he couldn't be a witness. The Gra was not makabel as Eidus, and they proceeded with the burning. But it gives you an idea. The erste yechidus are given nigle. That's they given the seder. Now Rabbi Hillel knew this. Rabbi Hillel Paracha knew the erste yechidus is nigle. So he prepared his Masad his kashas. He heard from all the chavre. I mean, you can't call them Lubavitcher chavre because they're not Lubavitch. They were Lozhner chavre, they were Aliyah chavre, by the Alter Rebbe, the first yechidus, Taferet Nyan nigle. So he prepared his kashas. The kashas that Rabbi Hillel had happened to be in Masechta Erechem, which is a Masechta in Kachim that come out nobody learns. Masechta Erechem. A kid said he's trying to get hold of the Alter Rebbe, and every city he comes to, the Alter Rebbe just left. So he goes ahead of the Alter Rebbe, and he waits for the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe comes, the Alter Rebbe goes to the next town, and then he goes to the town after that, and he's there ahead of the Alter Rebbe, waiting for the Alter Rebbe's arrival. Alter Rebbe comes into the cheder where he's going to stay, and Rabbi Hillel is under the table. And Rabbi Hillel wants to climb out from under the table and approach the Alter Rebbe, be matziyah himself, present himself, and to give a zettel. But before he comes out from under the table, he hears the Alter Rebbe's voice. It's Yadua that the Alter Rebbe spoke everything with a nigun, everything was with a tune. The Rebbe a few times imitated that tune that the Alter Rebbe used to sing. He says, a younger man was hat a shayle in Erechen, darf sich frier allein meiner sein. A young man who has questions in Masechta Erechen should first do an erech. By the way, Bashgacha Protes, the Kriyas HaTeire, the Chitas of this week, we're learning Parashat Bahar B'chol Keisai. The end of Parashat B'chol Keisai, that means the Chitas of Shabbos and maybe Friday, is, or parts of Friday is erech. These halachas. This week, Pasha. A younger man was a child of Masechta Erechen, a young man who was questioning Masechta Erechen, darf sich frier allein meiner sein. You have to do a erech on yourself. Rabbi Hillel prepared these kashas. Why? Because he was told about Alter Rebbe Deshazachas Nigla. Alter Rebbe broke his own rule, and his first yechidus was an inyan ahiron avedis Hashem, and Rabbi Hillel was so shocked by this that he chalished. By the time he came out of his chaloshes, Alter Rebbe was gone, and he never saw the Alter Rebbe. He never saw him. He only heard Alter Rebbe's voice. He didn't see the Alter Rebbe. The Noch is given the Milchama. There was the war with Napoleon. There was no traveling. When there was war, everyone stayed hidden in their holes. 2 years later, the Hillel says he wants to go to Lubavitch. The Mittel Rebbe had moved back to White Russia after having been deeper in Russia, in the Yadim, moved back to White Russia, Lubavitch, which is mamish next door to Lyozhne, where Alter Rebbe was born and was a Rebbe for many years. And Rabbi Hillel Parish decided he's going to Lubavitch. When Rabbi Hillel Parish went to the Alter Rebbe, he didn't feel he needed his Rebbe's permission, because the Alter Rebbe was a chaver of his father, of his Rebbe's father. But when he decided to go to the Mittel Rebbe, he felt that he has to get the shus from his Rebbe from Rav Matla Chernobyl. So he went into Rav Matla Chernobyl. He told Rav Matla Chernobyl that the Gemara says, why is it okay for a person to travel far away, to learn from a certain Rav? The is a Rav nearby. And of course the answer is, you can't learn, not everybody teaches in a way which is going to be effective for you. So the halacha is, you're allowed to travel even out of Eretz Yisrael if there's a malamed that you feel is going to teach you better than a different malamed. So he came to Reb Nachum Matla Chernobyl, Reb Nachum's son. He said, Rebbe, I'm thinking to go to Lubavitch. And Reb Matla Chernobyl told Rabbi Hillel, do not go. You stay here. And he said, Oib du wirst fahren, wirst du liegen mit dem Puppekaruf. If you're going to go, you're going to lay belly up. Now, if you ever had a fish in a little bowl, or even in a fish tank, yeah? What's the right that the fish is dead? Huh? That it's laying belly up. It's not a good bracha. But that's what his Rebbe said to him. You go to Lubavitch, wirst du liegen mit dem Puppekaruf. In other words, he told him, you're playing with your life. You're gambling. Rabbi Hillel was a Yid of Avodah, and a Yid Bemes, he was a Yid of Mesidus Nefesh. So he went anyway. And he knew that his Rebbe's akpede is fire. On the way to Lubavitch, they were traveling in a wagon, and the wagon was going fast, and it jumped over a bump. And he was thrown out of the wagon. It was a big, big bump. He flew, I don't know how many feet, but he flew a distance, and he landed flat on his back. And he got up, no broken bones, not chas v'shalom hipach achayim, got back into the wagon and continued going. When he came into the Mittler Rebbe, so the Mittler Rebbe had a different seder. The first Chassidus by the Mittler Rebbe, he would speak to you about Yonim of Tahara, Chatas Neurim. So at one point of Hillel Parish said to the Mittler Rebbe, I got a problem. The Matlat Shanabel told me that I should go, and I bechol fader v'achlik mit Pupikaruf. So the Mittler Rebbe looks at Hillel Parish and he says to him, Bist doch schon gelegen mit dem Pupikaruf. Like, well, you don't think I know what's going on. Bist doch schon gelegen. You, on the way here the first time, bist du gelegen Pupikaruf. Anyway, Rabbi Hillel Parish explained to Rabbi Isaac Homler his journey. Right? I talked in circles. Yeah, but the original story was, it's like bomer Weiss. It was like a kfiyas like this yet on a Tuesday. It was Chai Iyar. So the Monday before Yudzayin Iyar was the second Monday of Bahab. All of the Chassidim were mateneded and they washed, except for Rabbi Hillel. He waited for the sun to set and then he washed. And Rabbi Hillel gesagt. So Rabbi Hillel defended himself. And he told the whole story that I just told. He told, I don't know if he told it all the details. I'm sure he didn't tell it with the Guzmais, but he told the story. And he fed like this. He finished with these words. He says, Gloib mir. Rabbi Hillel said, Gloib mir, believe me. As alle meine Hidur mitzvah is as sich besser ablegen avot Chassidus. My whole frumkat, my whole Hidur mitzvah, in other words, it's not because I'm afraid of the Yetzer Hara or afraid of Gehenim, because it helps me understand Chassidus. The more eskafia I do, the more I bend myself, the more I don't give in to myself. It helps bring the Eira Chassidus to me. This was the word. This was a like bomer Farbrengen, where the Chassidim were Farbrengen, Chassidim were being Sameach. One of the Chassidim was a Yotzem and a Klal, and this is how he explained it. As Emedas given a year in Avoida. So this went on for many, many years. That the Rebbeim would leave Lubavitch sometime during the day. They'd do 25 like baby. They would come to the feld. They would sit. They would say L'chaim. They would tell some stories. They would say Chassidus. And as it says in that Yem, there's also a lot of Meifsim. Now, of course, you know and I know the Rebbe tzach gekocht made in dicken like Beimer. But like Beimer there was unbelievable. The Rebbe tzach kshar gekocht made in like Beimer. Because Lag BaOmer is connected to Pnimis HaTorah. But the union of Lag BaOmer is Chassidus, is Pnimis HaTorah, is Nishmas HaDeiraisa. This is the union of Rashbi. And the way I understand it is that these are different types of tzaddikim. You know, most tzaddikim, even big tzaddikim, safe to have a goof. Some tzaddikim, because they're be'etzem shayches the Pnimis HaTorah, even when they're in a guf, their inyan is not guf, the inyan is neshama. And Rab Shimon bar Yochai is in this category. That his whole mitzvah, his whole inyan is neshama. And the neshama is always happy. And because of that, his day, including David's histalkus, was celebrated an unbelievable simcha. Even though the very same day, we're happy that our Kiva's Talmidim didn't die. At the same time, we're celebrating the histalkus of Shem bar Yochai because he was a chatchila, a neshama person. And the neshama people, ikir and yonim is neshama. So the guf is not a ma'alim master. And like I told you guys in the morning, the thing about Rashbi, which is so remarkable, is how broad his appeal is. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai should really be understood and appreciated by a few big mukubban. The rest of us, I don't understand them. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai is very pluralistic, right? Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai has a lot of followers. There are people who follow Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai who are completely frei. Rachman Litzlan, in a very far maimed of matzev, when it comes to kiyam and mitzvah, the yemi, but they're mekushet to Rashbi. Why? Because the biggest tzaddikim have a shaykhs to the people who are the farthest away from their madrega. And they have a mordik koch and Rashbi. I remember Yaakov Nachman always used to say by the rallies that the Rebbe is our Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. So let's say l'chaim. I'm going to put myself on. I'll put myself on mask, like you're all on mask. Yes, I can go give myself a cup, so we could say l'chaim and we could sing. I cannot talk indefinitely, even if it looks that way. So I'm gonna come back in a minute. What niggin in Chabad is associated with Lag Baimer? Does anybody know? What niggin in Chabad is the niggin of Lag Baimer? Huh? Keine weiß nicht. The whole world sings Bar Yechoy and Omer Rabbi Akiva and Vamartem Koi Lachoy. What's the Lubavitch and niggin for Lag Baimer? No. Oh, a face. No, what's the teretz? Menachem Ganjburg, what's the teretz? Huh? Oh, my speaker is off. You're probably talking, I can't hear. Okay. Oh, you probably said it 10 times. I had my speaker off. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, like I said, I have my face off here, but I'm going to go get myself a cup. I'll say l'chaim. Aber man kann sagen, hine matov. Hine matov umanoim. By Reb Shmuel Zalmanov. And it's a likut of Rishimis from Friedrich Rebbe. I suspect that a lot of these Rishimis were written for the Sefer Negunim. Because there's Rishimis that are in no place else except here. The only place we have these das is here.
Which Sefer is that?
Sefer HaNegunim. The whole niggin is das.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, there's a Moeden Deka Hagdom. It's very long. And it has... It has about each niggin. So the first niggin is the Alter Rebbe's niggin. Let me see. I'm almost sure that in this Sefer, it says when we sing it. A bris, a bar mitzvah, a chasane, in chodesh Elul bam davnen, this is from Ois Ches. A bris, a bar mitzvah, a chasane, un oich in chodesh Elul bam davnen. That's one place. Give me a second. That's all. I didn't find anything more. There's some place where it says befedish where we sing it. I only found those few places.
Where we sing what?
When we sing, I'm asking if we sing the Alter Rebbe's thinking like bomer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like bomer is called Yilula, no?
Say again, please.
Like bomer is called Yilula.
Ubemele.
I know that Simon Jacobson had them sing it on the Hatzalah broadcast.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's bearing in any way, but just out of interest.
Oh, here it says. Here it is. I found it. B'yem achen shel gimel regalim. Put him. You'd be Kislev. You'd be Tamus. I knew it was here. Simchas Chasen Akadema. This is on page Mem Gimel of the Sefer Anagunim, and the other place was page Chav Dalet Sefer Anagunim. In the first place it says Abris Yutas Kislev Abris Bar Mitzvah Chasen Chedesh Elul, and here it says the last day of each of the 3 Yomim Tevim, Purim, Yutas Kislev, Yud Beis Tammuz, Simchas Chaseneh, Ukedaim. So the shaila is Ateres Menachem Shalom Aleichem is I don't hear. Ich hab den nicht gehört.
Freilichen like bomer.
Yeah, a gesundheit from the Gula Shleima. Anyway, so that's the question. Should we sing the Alter Rebbe's Niggin and Lag Bomer? If someone could come up with a...
Topshimem, entschuldigt, Rabbi Yossi, Topshimem heit men gesungen. Beim Rebben.
Beim Rebben kann man singen jeden Tag. Beim Rebben gesungen mehrere Mal, der Alter Rebbe's Niggin. Du gedenkst, Berchas Achama?
Ja.
Du gedenkst dem Genoi?
Ah?
Du gedenkst Genoi, Bediuk?
Ich kam 14 Jahre alt.
Wer hat angehebt mit Alter Rebbe's Niggin?
Der Rebbe geheißen am so Anfang.
Als steht in der Regime, ja? Als steht in der Regime.
Aber der Rebbe geklappt mit den Händen auf die Stände beim Chassidus. Ich habe es gewöhnt, sehr größer Israelschuss, also ich denke sich.
Ich bin gewesen in Kalifornien. Ich habe nicht gekannt sehen, aber ich mich kennt hören. Mir liegt im Kopf, der Rebbe hat allein angeheben. Aber Yossi Lo hat mir gesagt, das nicht stimmt. Auf dem Tape kann man nicht wissen, was hat schon mitten. Aber mir dachte sich, der Rebbe hat allein angeheben. Mit nicht gesungen in Hachone liegen. Sie sind gleich dem Alter Rebbe singen, an Hachone. Ah? Ja.
Ich bin an der Achon.
Okay, L'chaim, everybody, L'chaim. Okay, whoever has their thing on, please put yourself on mute. A few of you are not muted because I can hear a lot of noise. Okay, Menachem Mendel, Gansberg, you have to mute yourself, okay? I don't want to make speeches. Menachem Mendel Gansberg, you have to mute yourself. You have to put yourself on mute. You're not muted. I don't want to give drushes and populim. I don't want to put you to sleep because I'm already asleep myself. But I want to share with you a word. You know, I told you before the Maise with Reb Hillel. I told you the Maise with Reb Hillel. What's the Maise with Reb Hillel? The Maise with Reb Hillel is that he was very frum, was a moilendike mahade b'mitzvahs. And when he was asked about his frumkeit, he said, my whole frumkeit is as als ich besser ablegen avod Chassidus. An idea in Chassidus should click by me, ablegen zach. In other words, Rabbi Hillel's frumkeit was not stamazeh to torture himself, to make himself suffer, or as they say in the modern world, because he's OCD. The frumkeit of Rabbi Hillel was a keli for oyer. It was a keli for Chassidus. So the statement that I want to make, the nekuda that I want to say, and like I said, I'm going to try not to be too philosophical because I don't want to stamazeh reden. Is that to be a yid you have to work hard. Period. Lo yagaitu matzasa al tamin. If you want to succeed as a Jew, you got to work hard. However, the inyan of Chassidus and the inyan of Kabbalah and the inyan of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is oyer. The Chiddush of Pnimis HaTorah, the Baal Shem Tov and the Arizal and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is oyer, lichtigkeit, oyer. Oyer is not hard. Oyer comes from the Eibishter. But a chassid, especially a pnimi, a real chassid, worked on himself. And faket, he worked on himself more than a yid who wasn't a chassid, because only then would the oyer of Chassidus reach him, would the light of Chassidus reach him in a healthy way, in a correct way, and so on. So Chassidim am gehorevet. Chassidim worked very, very hard. But just like in the story of Rabbi Hillel, the point of the Yagiyah was the oil that came after. In other words, the difference between a Chassidish frumkeit and a Misnagdish frumkeit is, the opposite of frum is not chas v'shalom frei, you know? Everybody's frum. We all keep Teina mitzvahs. Some people are very mahader b'mitzvahs, and they're medaktek b'mitzvahs, and they're lefnim yishuras adin b'mitzvahs. I mean, to give you an example, which today everybody does. When we do Netilas Dayim for bread, we wash our hands 3 times, not twice or not once. Our tefillin are more mehuded than the tefillin of our ancestors. I mean, who does not eat today shmura matzah? Who does not eat shmura mishas k'tzireh? Who does not eat shmura the entire 8 days of Pesach? Amalek Ketzaitin, if you were lucky, you got shmura for the Seder. Shmura mishas k'tzireh, that shmura mishas tchina, shmura mishas k'tzireh, shmura mishas tchina. Matzah has to be shmura, but that should be shmura mishas k'tzireh, you couldn't afford it. Today, everybody eats shmura mishas k'tzireh. You wouldn't even think shmura matzah, that's not shmura mishas k'tzireh, you wouldn't even cross your mind to let it into your house. So in many ways, we're mahader b'mitzvahs in things that Amalek Ketzaitin people did not have. But the difference between the hider mitzvah of a non-chassid, of a misnagid, let's use that word, even though it's not the correct word, and it's not a good word, and it's not a helpful word, and the chassidische frumkeit is that the end of a Mesnagdische Frumkeit was the Frumkeit itself. Zihirus, in Kiyam HaMitzvahs, Lefnimi Shurus Adin, to be very medactic, was an end. And by Chassidim, there was an idea that the Yegiyah has to do with Oir. Which is why the minig by Chassidim was, you didn't just decide you want to be frum. You had to get the Rebbe's Reshus. Moreover, every frumkeit, every inyan of hidden mitzvah that you undertook, you had to go special to the Rebbe, either personally or write a letter, and get the Reshus to take on another chumrah, another hidden mitzvah. I'm not talking that chas v'sholom not to be frum. We're talking about lifnim, lifnai v'lifnim yeshur sadin. And sometimes the Rebbe would say no. I'll give you a modern example. This is before my time, and certainly before your times. But my father, the minig, when my father was a Bach in Yeshiva, it wasn't yet established that he put the Tam film onto Bar Mitzvah. Every Bar Mitzvah Bach got one period film, the Rashid film. And from the time you were 18 or so, they went in those days. They went to the Rebbe to Yechidus every year. You would ask the Rebbe about putting on a Ben Tam film. So many Bacharim, they went to the Rebbe at 18 years old. They said, "Should I put on a Ben Tam film?" And the Rebbe said, "Yeah." Other Bacharim, the Rebbe said, "No." The next day they would ask again, and then they turned 20. The Rebbe would say, "Yeah." My father, so Gezun Zayin, the Rebbe did not let him putting on a Ben Tam film until he became a Chassan. So it was very, very individual. And there's a story with a Bachar who said to himself, the Rebbe gives everybody permission at 18, he's going to do it himself. And the Rebbe heard about it. And the Rebbe said, "How you talking? You didn't ask." He says, but the Rebbe tells everybody, he says, you have to ask. And then one day, the Rebbe suddenly announces, every Bar Mitzvah Bachar should put on a Tam film. And then, of course, later the meaning became that the day you put on Rashi, you start Ben Tam. You don't even have a hefsek in between. There's a Davar Yadua that the Rebbe Rashab used to wash each hand 3 times in the Tilas Yadayim with a towel, with an aluntis. Both of these things were Chedushim. And the Rebbe saw once a Yid imitate him. 2 Yidden. 2 Yidden watched how the Rebbe Rashab washed, and they just did the same thing. They took a towel, they washed each hand 3 times. One of them was a Poshet Yid. He didn't know no Chochmas. He was not smart, he wasn't learned. He saw what the Rebbe did, he imitated him. The Rebbe didn't say a word to him. The other one was a Bal Madrege. The other one, Gehalt Manyon and Pnimiyim. And when he saw how the Rebbe washed, he also washed like that. And the Rebbe said to him, Wer sagt, dass ihr halt bei dem? Who says you're holding by it? So he told to the Rebbe, aber the Rebbe fits chazeh. The Rebbe is watching like this. And the Rebbe said, Wer sagt, dass ihr halt bei dem? Maybe you're not ready to do this. And by Rebbe Nishmas Hayden, by the Rebbe Rashab, the Friedrich Rebbe's father, there was a klal. He used to say about himself, a klal godel, quote, Ich hab nit lieb, als men ich hab nit holt, als men macht mich noch. I don't like when people imitate me. Men hagim, in Chumres, in the mitzvah, you have to have Rishus. Today is a different time. In our generation, the minig is based, of course, on the Rebbe's own teachings. Chateva, achel, chateva, ishtiya, chaparai, and every opportunity to do another even the mitzvah we take on. But in those days, you had to have Rishus. You couldn't just do whatever you want. A kid said, this is all a hagdama to a maisa. The maisa I'm about to tell you is written down by the Blazer Nana Salav Shalom, who was a very special man. He lived 99 years. 99 years. He spent almost 20 years in the Soviet Gulag. When he came out of Russia, he was almost 70 years old. He was an old man. And the Rebbe told him that the 20 years that he spent in the Russian prisons are not in the cheshbon. So him and his wife lived to almost till 100, both of them. A mamsha pele. A pile ploim de kazach. The Blazer Nanis. So the Blazer Nanis learned in Lubavitch. The Blazer Nanis came from the colonies in Kherson. I don't know how much history you know. The colonies in Kherson, the Kherson colonies where the Mittel Rebbe got land from Alexander, from the Russian king at the time, and he moved around 2,000 mishpachas of Anash to the Kherson, to the Ukraine, that they should work the land. And they became farmers. The Mittel Rebbe loved the idea of a chassid farmer. Him being close to nature was like the same thing as being close to God. It's maybe I'm sorry, just 1 second. I just got a message which I don't understand. Okay, I apologize. The downside of the computer is that you know everything, so you have to stop to look at this until you enter into tumult. Anyway, Reb Leizer Nanis grew up on these colonies, right? The Mittel Rebbe sent 2,000 mishpachas. By the time Reb Leizer Nanis was born, there were 10,000 mishpachas. It was a huge kil of Anash in that whole region. You know, the names, the cities that you know is Padabronke, and I forgot the names already. Nikolaev. Nikolaev is near the colonies. The Rebbe was born in Nikolaev. Our Rebbe was born. Romanovka. This is out the colonies in Kherson. The Rebbe's parents were born there. The Rebbe was born in Nikolaev. Nikolaev was a big city, but it was right there. And there were thousands and thousands of mishpachos of Anash. They stayed from the times of the Mittel Rebbe till the Holocaust. The Anash, the Chassidim lived there. And each of the Masmid came to the colonies. And he spent Shabbos in the house of Leizer Nanis' parents. Let's say Leizer Nanis came from a very important mishpacha of Anash. They're very edlich. Each of the Masmid were a Meshuggah. When it came to Frumkat, he was crazy. And he stayed in their house, in Leizer Nanis' parents' home. So you can understand that Leizer Nanis' parents are given edlich Yidden. Mrs. Nanis, Leizer Nanis' mother, wanted to make for each of the Masmid food for Shabbos. So she said to him, I want to make you chicken, fleish, and kugel. And each of the Masmid said, no, he doesn't want. He'll eat tzimmis, a sweet potato. But the Mrs. Nanis very much wanted to give him a Chol Shabbos. So she said to him, what's it going to take? What's it going to take that you should eat in my house basar? And you don't mean basar behem, you mean basar of sachakal. Chicken. So Rabbi Leizer Nanis said, if the sheikhet will come to the house, and I'll check the chalif right before the shechita, and right after the shechita I'll eat. And of course she'll kasher, and then he'll eat. So she did it. The sheikhet came to the house, and he shechted a chicken. He checked the chalif before the shechita, checked the chalif after the shechita, and shain. She took off the fur, the feathers, and the skin. She kashered the chicken. She cleaned it. She kashered it, and she made for him for Shabbos. He should have food that he could eat. And she also made kugel. Kugel really is the old word for chont. They didn't have chont like we have. You took one item of food, whatever you had, meat, whatever they had. They didn't have much. You put it into the oven. It baked in the oven overnight. So in the morning it was hard on top and hard on bottom. Kugel. Kugel was like chont. It was chamin. What happened was, when she made the kugel, she didn't have enough schmaltz. Every chicken comes with a little bit of schmaltz. It didn't have enough schmaltz. So she took schmaltz from a different chicken, and she mixed it into the kugel, and she forgot. Anyway, each of the Masber gedavnt the ganzen Tag, Kedake Bakedish, all day long gedavnt. In oven, Shabbos noch Mittag is kommen heim obsessed. He came home to eat Shabbos, Sudas Shabbos. When he came into the house, the Rav in that city, and it says the names of these people, I remember the names, came to visit the Bishop of the Masmid and Farbrengen with him. So the Bishop of the Masmid was eating breakfast at 5, 6 in the afternoon, you understand? And the Rav was a big Talmud Chacham and a big Yidei Shemaim, and a Chassidus was sitting in Farbrengen. So Mrs. Nanis was so happy she was able to give him a Chol Shabbos, a piece of chicken, a piece of fish, and then she brought him a piece of kugel. And the Bishop of the Masmid picked up the fork to eat the kugel, and he says to Mrs. Nanis, the schmaltz is von mine off. He had that chush harech, he knew. Like almost like a Ruach HaKodesh. The schmaltz that you put into this piece of kugel is from my chicken. And she said, yeah. She forgot. She said, yeah. He picked up the fork, and he had no time. He didn't want to eat it. He picked up the fork, and he put it down. He picked up the fork. He pushed it. He said he's not eating. He didn't even know why. Mrs. Nanas figured out later that there was schmaltz that was not from the chicken that he had checked the challah before and after, and Pashat, almost like a Ruach HaKodesh, he didn't want to eat it. The Rav of that town, who was much older than Abitcher, says to the Abitcher, the Masbid, I didn't have kugel. You should know one of the things, Chabad is not very intimate in Hagim, but one of them in Hagim and Chabad is Shabbos Daf Mes and Kugel. Shabbos Daf Mes and Kugel. So he says to the Blazer, to the Bishop of the Masbid, I did not eat any kugel. If you're not going to eat the kugel, can I eat the kugel? He says, sure. So he ate the kugel. Blazer Nans was a bocher. He was home punkt from yeshiva. And he witnessed this entire episode. He Pashat saw on the Ruach HaKodesh, yeah? A Yid only eats chicken. Chicken. We're not talking about meat. Chicken. If he checks the challah before and after, somebody made a mistake and put schmaltz. I was 100% kosher from a different off, and he had Pasha didn't eat it. He didn't know why he didn't eat it. A little while after, a few months later, Rabbi Yossi the Masbid came to the Rebbe Rashab, and if I'm not mistaken, it was not in Lubavitch anymore. It was in Slavinsk, or it was in Ural, or it was in Rostov. The Rebbe Rashab moved a few times, and there was once a night of Yechidus, and the maskir, the regular secretary, wasn't there. So the Friedrich Rebbe asked Leizer Nanas, who was from the Elter Bachrim, to stand by the door. The people go, which we organize Shem Mamtir, who goes in and who goes out, and if people take too long, you should go in and pull them out. And he stood there a whole night. One of the people who went into Yechidus that night to the Rebbe Rashab was the Bishop of the Masbid. Leizer Nanas was a ganef. He was a lowlife. He wanted to hear the Yechidus between the Rebbe Nishma Seid and the Bishop of the Masbid. So he left the door open, a crack, so he could hear. The Bishop of the Masbid walks into the Rebbe Rashab, and he starts crying. He's crying. And he tells the Rebbe Rashab the story that I just told you. How an old Lubavitcher Rav trusted the kashrus of Mrs. Nanas, and he ate her kugel, and he didn't. And he's Pashat crying. And he says to the Rebbe Rashab, he says to the Rebbe Nishma Seiden, I took upon myself this hidur mitzvah, that I will not eat flesh, chicken, meat, forget about it, I wouldn't think about eating it. Unless I checked the challah before and after. And I didn't ask the Rebbe. I didn't ask the Rebbe if this is a good hidur mitzvah for me. In other words, you had to get reshus. You wanted to take on another chomer, you had to get reshus. He says, I didn't ask the Rebbe, but Mela, I'm asking the Rebbe, was I right or was I wrong? An old Lubavitcher Rav doesn't have this chumrah, and I do. Is it a good chumrah for me? And he's crying. And Leblazer Nanas is standing by the door listening. He knew the first half of the story because he was a witness. And now he's hearing the second half of the story. And the Rebbe Rashab says, Nei Nietzsche, Fadir das a gute chumrah. Nay, over and over again. No, each of you. And each of the Masbid is crying. He's very upset that he did something without asking the shus. And the Rebbe says, Nein itche, I think he told him, Fadir is jede Sache an Inyan. But he told him, Nein itche, Fadir is a gute chumrah. This was the Yechidus. The reason I'm telling the story is to bring out this point, that of course Chassidim were mahader b'mitzvahs, and in our generation the shita is always, Chatev v'achel, Chatev ishti, if you can be more mahader, you should take on every chumrah, every hidur mitzvah you can take on, it's a good thing. But there was an order to it, there was a system. It wasn't hefker. You take a hidur mitzvah, you had a shus in the Rebbe. Why? There's an expression, best in Israel. Why? Because a frumkeit, which is not connected to Avodas Hashem, it's stam out of fear, it's almost like a superstition. Yiddishkeit doesn't consist of taking on every chumrah, every shita. You have to be the bigger the Baal Madrege, the more in yonim of chumrah of hidur mitzvah you can take on. And always the rule is, you take on an extra inyan for Yiras Shamayim, Favos. To quote Reb Hillel Paracher, the Rebbe said this many times, as those are better upleg navat Chassidus. You take on a hidur mitzvah and a chumrah, so that you should be closer to the Eibishter. Right? A chumrah is not to stay out of Gehenna. You understand? The chumrah is to be close to Atzmas Ein Sof. This is how it works. Okay. Then comes Chassidus. Now you guys are young. Some of you are younger, some of you are older, but you guys are young, right? You're certainly younger than I am. Not that I'm old, but you're younger. And you learn Chassidus. So for some of you, Chassidus is like boring. What am I doing? And for some of you, Chassidus is pure Gan Eden. It's so delightful. It's such a wonderful just to be involved in Elokus and in Ruchnius and in Ein Sof and in Atzilus and in Sfiris and then in Partzufim. It's gewaldig. There's one thing that Chassidus doesn't have. Chassidus does not have Yegiya. Chassidus is Oyer, Kabbalah. It's Oyer, Lichtigkeit. It lifts you up, raises you up. You don't have in Limud Chassidus the same Milchama, even, that you have in Limud HaNigle. And you certainly don't have in Limud HaChasidus the same Milchama that you have in life, in Askafye, in controlling your Yetzer Hara, to be careful where you look, and to be careful what you listen to, and to be careful what you put into your mouth, and to be careful what comes out of your mouth. In other words, in the area of his, Chassidus is Oyer. Chassidus is Oyer. And that's a shtikele sakonim. Today you have hippies lemineim. Yeah, hippies lemineim. I don't want to give you an education, but they're called Chabakuk. You know what Chabakuk stands for? It's 4 letters. Ches, Beis, Kuf, Kuf. That's Chabad, Breslev, Karbach, Kuk. It means all the weird Jews in the world. What do they have in common? They're spiritual. Holy, Ruchnius. Very happy people, very spiritual people. But fighting with the Yetzer Hara, not necessarily. There are people on this planet who love Chassidus. And they love Taivas. And there's no contradiction. They learn Chassidus a half a day and the Mal Taiva half a day. Ayetz estire. Because this is one of the things about Limud HaChassidus, which is a sakana. Chassidus is oir. Chassidus is just holiness. Chassidus is pure pleasure. And when you learn Chassidus and you have pleasure from Chassidus, and there's no iskafye, there's no fight, there's no mochama, then the Chassidus becomes a taiva. It becomes literally a taiva. The whole inyan of Chassidus is that it's oyer, it's lichtigkeit, it's elokus, it's getlichkeit, that rests on the iskafye that we do. On the iskafye that we do. And of course this explains why there are so many objections to learning Kabbalah. Right? They go back in human history, Jewish history, there was Gzeres and Chumris, and learning Kabbalah. The Ramak says till 40, I think. The Rishayim said till 25. There was all kinds of Agbalas when you're allowed to learn Kabbalah. Why? What's wrong with learning Kabbalah? Imagine someone coming making a Gzeir, you can't learn Gemara till 18. There's no such thing. Why, when it comes to Kabbalah, with all these Gzeiris? So the answer by Pashtus is because Kabbalah is very holy, and if a person learns Kabbalah and he's not Shaykhas Limud Kabbalah, so then it's a chilul, it's a fashvechog, it's a desecration, it's a defilement of the Kedusha. But the practical reason why there were so many Gezeiros on Limud Kabbalah, because when you learn Pnimis HaTorah, and you don't do an iskafia, it's like going on a trip. A trip, I mean like drug addicts go on trips, not like kids in camp go on trips. You go from reality. And it's not lifting you up. It's not bringing you closer to the Eibishter. And it's not Avodas Hashem. It could mamish be taiva. This is why, for a very, very long time, for most of our history, Kabbalah was for Yechidei Gula. Who learned Kabbalah? You know, like it says in Likutei Torah, in Parshas Tazria, Biriru kol advarim, tiknu kol amaisim. People were very oizgeidelt. They could learn Pnimiyas HaTorah, and they would lift them up. Stam Azay Yidden learning Kabbalah was a sakana. Until the Baal Shem Tov. Stay till the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov came along and he said, in the name of Mashiach Tzidkenu, which means that the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu depends on the Fatas Chassidus. And the Baal Shem Tov began to be made for Samayonas Achutza. I mean, you guys know the story. You guys know the story or not? You know the story. The Rebbe once mentioned the story by Farbrengen. It's in the Polish Welt. It's one of those famous mices. It says in the letter from the Baal Shem Tov that when he met Mashiach, he asked Mashiach, Rabbi Yossi, man, when are you going to come? So Mashiach answered him, when all the Yidden are going to learn how to be miyachid yichudim kamaischa, or kishiyafutza manasecha chutza, when all Yidden are going to learn how to do yichudim like you, and when your mayonis are going to spread to the outside, then Mashiach will come. So the Baal Shem Tov writes, I started to cry. And he says, why? I started to cry because I realized the Mashiach is not going to come for a long time. So there's a word, which is given over Baal Peh, probably it's in print also in many places, that even though the Baal Shem Tov writes in the letter why he cried, there was nevertheless a machlokes vasad yemein than Baal Shem Tov's tered. What was the reason Baal Shem Tov's tear? Who was the machlokes between? The machlokes was between the Alter Rebbe and the Baruch Meshbesher. The Baruch Meshbesher was the Baal Shem Tov's grandson. The Baruch Meshbesher's mother was her name was Odel, Aleph Dal Lamed Odel, and she was Baal Shem Tov's daughter. Kipshut, he was Baal Shem Tov's grandson. The Baruch Meshbesher. The Baruch Meshbesher held that the real reason the Baal Shem Tov cried was because he was upset about Tishtapechna Avnei Kodesh Bereish Kol Chutzes. There's something so holy, so sacred, like Pnimiyas HaTorah, that for thousands of years they wouldn't let people learn it, and they end up rolling in the streets. Every Abi Vernik, nobody's going to be learning Pnimiyas HaTorah. So he cried that the Chassidus is going to be mischalel, desecrated, made ordinary. The Alter Rebbe said no. But the Baal Shem Tov cried because it's going to take so long for Mashiach to come. So since these two tzaddikim have differences of opinion why the Baal Shem Tov cried, but the Lashon is the Baal Shem Tov's tered, the Baal Shem Tov's tear. Each one dedicated his life to healing, to remedying, to fixing the Baal Shem Tov's tear, l'shitasi. The Baruch Meshbesher fought against Havatas Chassidus. He went to war that people should not be made for Chassidus Chutza. Why not? Because Baal Shem Tov cried that you're going to take Pnimiyas HaTorah with its incredible holiness, and he put it in the street, and everybody the Chad Yema is going to learn it and think he's a maven, and so on. The Alter Rebbe looked at the Baal Shem Tov's tered differently. Alter Rebbe looked at the Baal Shem Tov's tered. The Baal Shem Tov cried because he didn't say so long for Mashiach to come. So he immediately undertook to spread Chassidus as quickly and as broadly and as fast as possible to hasten the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu. So for thousands of years, Yidden didn't learn Pnimiyas HaTorah, and all of a sudden we are. And as the Rebbe always says, Ach she'dara b'tmiyah. No one is going to say that we learn Pnimiyas HaTorah because we're in a higher madrega than our ancestors. It's silly, it's foolish, it's dipshus. We learn Pnimiyas HaTorah in our generations for a simple reason. It's pekuach nefesh mamish. We learn Chassidus. Yeah, you guys are young, some of you. The kids start learning Chassidus when they're 10, when they're 11, when they're 12 and 13. And the fact is, Tevav Ne'adam is, if you would say to a 12-year-old Lubavitcher boy, or to a 13-year-old Lubavitcher boy, to a 14, you can't learn Chassidus till you're 16. And maybe you'll teach once a week Tanya. That would create in so many of the kids such a chukka, such a thirst for Chassidus. There'd be more Chassidus in wanting to learn Chassidus than in learning Chassidus itself. But we don't do it. We teach children who are really ill-equipped. They're not sophisticated enough. They're not sensitive enough. They're not deep enough to understand what they're learning. And by the time the kids become old enough to understand what they're doing, they've learned so much Chassidus. They're so used to it that they don't appreciate how special it is. Why? Why did the Rebbe elect to go on this pathway? It's a teretz napasheter. Like the Baal Shem Tov, like the Alter Rebbe told the Pinchas Koretzin. Because it's Pasha Pekuach Nefesh. It's the Evin Tev Shebekeser HaMelech. That the son of the king, the prince, is dying, and you have to keep him alive. And the only way to keep him alive is by giving him this potion. And the only way to get this potion is to take the stone, which is the foundation of the king's crown. That in order to get that stone out of the crown, you have to smash the crown to little pieces. And once the crown is smashed, it's smashed. And take out that Evin, grind it up into a powder, and give it to the prince. Maybe a few drops will be ingested and bleiben leben. So we teach Chassidus in a Kamos Rav, the Shemusha Shalteira, the Chassidus stories, and then even Limudah Chassidus itself, Tanya, Maimorim from a very early age, Even though Apiseichel and Apisvara, they don't have an ability to fully understand what they're doing. They really don't have an ability to fully do it. We teach it to them. Why? Because the shita is, if you give a Yiddish kind Chassidus, you're giving him Atzalas Nefashos. Because Chassidus is a lakus. Chassidus is a munah. Chassidus is a oyer that touches the neshama. And a day before and a day after, it wakes up the neshama. And this is the derech, this is the shita of the Rebbeim. To take little children, teach them Chassidus. They really can't understand what they're learning. They certainly can't appreciate how what they're learning is different and special. But that's this. But I want to say something on the other side. And that is, medafnish mahader sein in sein an idiot. Which means in English, for those whose Yiddish is a little bit faulty, it's not hidur mitzvah to be an idiot. What that means is this. It's taketru. That the minig in our generations is to be meifetz mayanis chutza even to little children, and lahad even to goyim. But the tradition was to give an amol that in order for the Eira Chassidus, for Chassidus to touch me and to uplift me and to bring me closer to the Eibishter and to Einig Alaki is iskafia. It's iskafia. It's bending ourselves. And this is important to understand. The more iskafia we do, the more close to the Einig Alaki we become. I think it's important for people to be careful about iskafia, because iskafia can make you depressed, iskafia can make you angry, iskafia can make you nervous. Those are all bad things. But the idea from Begenzach, the idea that if we want the light of Chassidus to truly transform us, we have to give of ourselves. This is how it used to be, and this is how it is today by people with seichel. They don't just enjoy Chassidus, a maimer Chassidus, a seder Chassidus, a limud of Chassidus comes along with a hidden mitzvah, with a iskafia. And that iskafia affects that the Eira Chassidus, which you're going to learn, is nimshach in tapnimis. It's internalized. And Rashbi lived 2,000 years ago. In his generation, everybody was on such a high level. In other words, there was so much iskafia, there was so much bittul, that there was no sakana. There was no sakana. Everybody learned to sit, even children. But before Reb Shimon Chai passed away, he instructed that they should write the Zayah down. And he also instructed the Zayah should be buried and hidden, and that's what happened. The Zayah was gone for a very, very long time. Why? Because of this fear. It's not the pshat that today the fear exists less than Amal, it's the pshat that we have no breira. It's pashat survival. Okay, l'chaim. L'chaim, everybody, l'chaim.
Chaim al-Vacha.
So we're going to sing the Alter Rebbe's Niggin, and we're not going to sing the Alter Rebbe's Niggin. What did the committee of rabbis say? Ah?
Ish hayosher bein of Yasser.
Erstens darf man sein Ish. Und zweitens darf man haben Mascheiches mit Yashrus. Und drittens darf man haben edle, reine Augen. Ha? Und danach darf man verstehen, als Asiya meint, man darf sich drücken. You know that Asiya, du bist doch ein Landen. Asiya means like get me'use, like ma'asin al tzedakah. It's not Ish, but unless you touch Yasa, you force the other guy to do. And if Yasa means you force the other guy to do it, so they have to say Pshat Nishkol Yosher Be'einav Yasa is Zich Alein. So Kol Yosher Be'einav doesn't mean I can do it if I want, because then it's not Yasa. The Herz Menachem Mendel Ezra behind the mask.
I hear.
No, so you tell me. Should we sing the Alter Rebbe's thing? You didn't expect that Pshat, huh? It would be nice if I could see your face, holy brother. Anstatt behalten sich.
Mitam on Kamos City, it's not possible.
In other words, you're komos mitam komos. Yes, shloima, it's not the pshat the tam is komos, that you want the tam to remain komos. The only way the tam is komos is because you're komos. Okay, I'm gonna go get my hat.
I'm supposed to stay Kamos too.
I hear that. I'm gonna get my hat and my jacket. You can all go your hats and your jackets. I found a mice with the Rebbetzin. I told this you many times that the Rebbe came home surprised. B'chlal, when the Rebbe would come home, all the Bachrim would leave. There was a few Bachrim who worked in the house. Once the Rebbe came home early, and there was a few Bachrim in the house. I don't know how many. So one of the Bacham ran to put on his hat and his jacket. So the Rebbetzin said to Shalom Gansberg, I think, is gegangen nehmen sein Chassid. Those are the words. Is gegangen nehmen sein... The Rebbetzin, the Fidik Rebbetzin, Tochter, the Rebbetzin. Is gegangen. In other words, you put your hat and your jacket on, now you're a Chassid. You take your hat and jacket off, you're not a Chassid. I don't know if she was being critical. I don't even know if she meant it, but in these few words, gegangen nehmen dem Chassid, sein Chassid, you put on your hat and your jacket. But I heard from the Rebbe myself, after the gedenkst to Hirschel, the Rebbe gesagt amol, this is Bozeh HaLoshen Mamish. Men zet bemuchish was gresse de Hittel als mehr de Yerushalayim. Du gedenkst?
Nach Farbrengen?
Ja, Shabbos. So mir stamme gewinn noch Schliches, bei mir, das heißt, mit dem Zayin, mit dem Ches. Weißt du, bei mir, die ganze Leben geht in 3 Kufes. Bis Schliches und doch Schliches. Sie gewinn später. Es war falsch Schliches, wollte gedenkt, was hat sich gerät darum? Du gedenkst nicht. Aber der Rebbe hat gesagt, sicher. Man sagt bemuchisch, der Rebbe hat gesagt, ein Chabad kocht man sich nicht in Chitzenies, aber man sagt bemuchisch, das meiste hat mir gerät, der Rebbe hat der größte Hittel. Was größer der Hittel als mehr der Yerushalayim. So, weißt du, als in der Regime steht, als der Rebbe Rayatz hat gesagt dem Rebbe, als der Tate seine, der Rebbe Rashab hat gesagt dem friedlichen Rebbe, ich bin mekane pelische Chitzenies. Das ist in der Regime.
Who said that?
Der Rebbe Rashab told the friedliche Rebbe, ich bin mekane pelische Chitzenies. The Rebbe Rashab spent a year or a few months in Vienna, in Tafresh Samach Beis. There's a lot of stories that we know about that trip. And one of the things to know about the trip was he met a lot of different Chassidish kehilas. Not necessarily Rebbes, but he met Chassidim. He watched Chassidim in action. And he was sometimes quite impressed. Pelish Chassidim, he was very impressed with the Yerushalayim, with the Tmimus, with the Avos Hashem, with the Yiras Hashem, with the Avos Rebbe. And he would talk about it in a very